Today I'm going to show you how to create the sixth metal in my metal series. This is procedural chromium metal. I'm going to show you three different versions. The two on the left are the same, and the two on the right are two different displacement versions. And seeing how I've made 5 of these already, I'm going to try and introduce a new way to displace these two examples on the right that I haven't shown so far. These aren't going to be super easy. I'd say it's more of an intermediate or advanced tutorial, and this is what the end node setup is going to look like on average. I'll also put a list of the node wrangler shortcuts that I frequently use if you want to consult it. Shift A, I don't think that's a node wrangler shortcut, but it's a shader editor shortcut that I use very heavily. I also noticed a few changes with the way things work in the shader editor, with how the search function works and how the gray values are interpolated. I'll go into that in more detail when it's relevant in the video. Let's just talk about chromium briefly. Chromium is a lustrous, brittle, and hard metal that is silver gray and highly polishable. It doesn't tarnish in air, but it does form green chromic oxide when heated. It is mainly used in alloys like stainless steel, chrome plating, and also in metal ceramics. It's not a rare metal. There are fairly large reserves of chromium. To set up our scene, let's select our cube and hit Shift D, and we'll constrain it to the Y-axis. Just hold down Control so that it snaps from point to point, and just left-click when you're happy with the placement. I'm going to select this first cube and hit S, Z, and 0.1 to size it on the Z-axis, and hit Control A and apply that scale as well. Come over to the right and click on the modifiers panel. Go ahead and add a bevel modifier, and for the amount, select 0.04, and we'll do 3 segments. And then go ahead and bring up this context menu. It's either going to be W or right-click, and just select Shade Smooth. For the second cube, hit Control 4. That'll set up a subdivision surface modifier. Just set the render at 4 as well. And then go ahead and add a cast modifier. This is just going to make it a complete sphere, because currently it's not quite one. And under factor, just hit 1 and enter that into the field. Hit W or right click and just shade smooth that object as well. I'm going to move my sphere a little closer to my, my object here. Let's hit G, and I'll just hit the Y. And maybe let's just put it something like this. It doesn't really matter. Just set it up how you want. Then hit Shift A. We're going to bring in a plane. And move that down a little bit with G and then Z. Hit S and then 5 to scale it up by a factor of 5. And tab into Edit Mode. Hit 2 to go into Edge Select. I'm going to grab this back edge and hit E and Z to extrude it straight upwards. Grab this edge again and hit Control B and we'll be able to bevel it. And we can add maybe 7 or 8 sections there. And then just tab back into object mode and W right click, shade smooth. Next, I'm going to bring in some HDRI lighting. So let's select this light, hit X, just to go ahead and delete that. Come over here to the world properties, and next to color, just go ahead and hit select environment texture. Click open, and just find where you've got some HDRIs. I've got some nice free ones that I found on HDRIhaven.com. And I'm going to select Kaylee Interior 1K. That's probably all you really need. I also need to switch to cycles, so I'm going to go over to the render properties and just select cycles. Let's leave it unsupported, but if you have GPU, go ahead and select that. Go back to the world properties, and this option is now available under ray visibility to uncheck camera. And actually, I'll just go into rendered mode so we can see what that's doing. If I have camera checked, we've got the background visible, the HDRI, but if I uncheck that, it's invisible, but it continues to light my scene, so it's a really nice way to create some fast, easy lighting. Now that we set all that up, let's change the entire middle area to the shader editor. Hit N to get rid of that shelf, and let's go ahead and change this top right to the 3D viewport. Let's go ahead and select one of these materials here. They should both have the same material, and let's just rename that Chromium. Let's make our 3D viewport a little bit bigger by dragging this as well so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. Hold down Z, move the mouse up, we'll be in rendered mode. Let's get started on the texture now. It's going to be similar to a lot of other metal videos that I've done already. Hit Shift A to bring in a texture, or a node rather. I'm going to hit Search, and actually this is one of the differences with 2.92 and 2.93. If I type in text, texture coordinate is no longer the first selection. It's easier to just type in chord, and then it'll come up, but it's a little annoying. Control Shift left click to generate a preview here. I'm just going to go from the object output. I'm going to type in noise. You'll notice actually another thing, white noise is the first one. I have to go down and select it there. So plug that in, and then bring in a mix RGB Usually I just type mixer, at least that still works, and we'll put that on the end there and just plug object into color 2 as well. And this is essentially a controller for how much influence this noise texture has going downstream here. If this is all the way to the left, it's like this mix isn't even here because it's just basically bypassing it. And if I have it all the way to the right, it's as if this noise texture isn't even here. I'm going to set the scale on the noise texture to 0.6, and then on the mix, I'm going to set the factor to 0.9. So the influence isn't super strong, and the noise texture is pretty low frequency, so it's going to be a larger noise texture. I'm just going to get rid of this principled BSDF for now, and I'll move these over a little bit. And let's go ahead and set up a mapping node. Place that here. And then we'll set up a Musgrave node. Place that here. And then we'll set up a color ramp and place that here. I'm just going to move all these up a little bit. Come over to the Musgrave texture. Let's set the scale at 6.5, the detail to 9.3, and the dimension to 0.1. And we'll leave the linearity as is at 2. I'd like to talk briefly about something I noticed once I started working in Blender 2.92 versus 2.91. When I went into the shader editor, I noticed that the gray values of the color ramp right here, let's check this out. If you adjust these, they're not interpolated the same way. You know, if you go up to about halfway, it used to be 0.5 right here, but now it says 0.214. And if you set this at 0.5, it's actually closer to like, I don't know, 0.78 or maybe 0.8 or something like that. So what this means is the interpolation is now basically it's a much wider range for the lower spectrum, and the higher spectrum up here is much narrower. I actually like this change. I find it easier to work with roughness and similar things. And it's not just for color ramps. It seems to be for all interpolation of this value slider here, just for the, white and black or, whatever colors. It's not really a big deal. It just means that if you're working on, 2.91 or earlier, and I'm doing a tutorial on 2.92 or later, you're going to have to adjust it the same way you'd have to adjust it if you're doing it on 2.92 or later, and you're watching a tutorial that I did 2.91 or earlier. So in case that was confusing, I'm going to show you a quick chart here. So if you're 2.91 or earlier, and the value is 0.8, in 2.92 and later, it's just going to shift to this, and that actually does it automatically if you bring a file between the two different versions. This is more just if you're following a tutorial from the different cutoff point than what I'm showing you. So yeah, you can see 0.8 goes to 0.6, 0.6 0.32, 0.5 to 0.21, 0.45 to 0.17, 0.4 to 0.13, 0.3 to 0.073. So basically, it's a distance, or pardon me, a difference of about 2 to 0.29, 0.2 to 0.29. And you can see as it gets closer and closer to 0.5, the difference is higher there. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing. Ask me questions if you are confused and I'll explain it. But I just wanted to point it out. It's not really even that big of a deal. It's just going to cause some minor hiccups when you're trying to recreate these textures in a different version. So let's go to this color ramp here. We're going to set this up. Let's change this bottom slider to go to this value field, and we'll select 0.13. We'll also bring this white down to 0.8, the flag there. And then on this mapping node, let's change the X under scale to 0.5. We can see what we've done so far is we've just stretched this pattern a little bit along the X-axis. Just grab these 3 nodes, and we're going to duplicate these 4 times with Control-Shift-D, so they remain attached to this mix RGB here. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Basically, we're going to adjust these all slightly differently, then mix them all together. Let's set up the second one now. Let's start with the mapping node. We're going to change the Y on the location data to 0.2, and then just go to the X there and change the scale to not point, just to 2. So now we can see it's actually stretched along the Y-axis a little bit. And then let's adjust the color ramp. Click on this gray value here, and we'll put in 0.17. So this one's a little bit lighter there. It's going to have slightly less influence, but not by that much. On to the third strand. Let's take a look at this one now. For the mapping node, let's change Y on the location to 0.4, and then under X for the scale, let's change it to 0.2 this time. So we can see it's even more stretched along the X-axis this time. Then let's change something on the Musgrave. Let's change it to 1 for the scale. So it's a much bigger pattern. Then for the color ramp, let's change this as well. We'll change this gray value here to 0.07. We can see that's a bit darker. This is going to exert a little more influence on our final pattern when we add it together. Let's take a look at the fourth one now. Let's start by changing the Y location to 0.6, and then we'll do the X scale at 4. Let's take a look at this guy. You can see again it's stretched along the Y-axis this time, and it's a little bit smaller. Let's change the value on this bottom flag on the color ramp here. We'll change it to 0.6. So this is actually going to be much lighter. This is going to exert much less influence on the pattern. Let's do the last setup here. For the mapping node, let's change the X to 0.1 and the Y to 0.7. These location values are kind of arbitrary. These scale ones matter much more, but you can always change them around, get a different pattern here. I'm just showing you what I set up so you can get the same values as me. For this X scale, let's set it at 6.8. We'll leave this Musgrave texture alone. We'll come to this color ramp, set this bottom flag. The value is going to be 0.32. So it's a little light as well. This isn't going to exert too much influence here. Let's now mix them all together. And to do that, I'm going to use math nodes. I'll add it in here. If I open this up and hit M, it'll change it to multiply. And I'm going to plug the top one and the second from the top just into the two sockets there. If we look at that, we can see it's already pretty interesting. We got some cool black, maybe not quite black, but dark gray, light gray, and white values there. So we're going to continue on and mix all of these together. We'll duplicate this multiply, plug this in here. Let's just try and keep this a little closer together as well. Let's do that again, duplicate it, put it here, plug this guy in here. One more time, plug this in here, and plug it in here. You can see the result is quite dark, and that's why I lightened it up quite a bit. And I'm going to do that again with another color ramp right after this here. Let's just bring that in, place it right there, and then we're going to bring this white slider to 0.5. You could bring it further down if you wanted and lighten this up. This is just what I had for my final render. So then I'm going to bring in another color ramp, put it right after here, and I'm going to duplicate this 3 times with Control-Shift-D. So we have 4 different strands. And these are going to be our metal details. This top one is going to be the color. This is going to be the metallic value. This is going to be the roughness. And this is going to be the bump map. So let's bring in a principled BSDF, the one that I deleted a while back. And this top one is just going to go right into the base color. This is going to go into the metallic. This is going to go into the roughness. And this is going to go into the normal. But we need to put a node in between there. And that is a bump map. So we'll plug this into height. Then we'll plug this into the normal. Let's start by setting up the color on the top here. I'm going to split my screen and just open up the image editor. And I've got a Chromium, just a picture of Chromium that I downloaded that I'm going to drag in here as a reference, just from Google Images. Then if I zoom over this color ramp, or hover over this color ramp, pardon me, and just hit E here, it brings in this eyedropper tool. Then I can just drag this across my image over here, and it'll give me different results here. That's probably a bit too white. I'm going to get some more silver there. Just do this a couple times until you're happy with the result. And actually, let's unplug this and just turn that metal up to 1 in the meantime, so we can see our color a little bit better. Maybe that's a little too dark. Let's get some more white in there as well. So maybe if I go like this. That's okay for now. I can always adjust it if I want to at some point. Let's close this back up here and check out this metalness here. So for this guy, we're not going to change the gray values on these 2 sliders, but we're just going to change the position. So this black one is going to go to 0.6, and this white one is going to go just below it at 0.5. We can see basically there's mostly white here, which is going to translate to 1. So most of this is going to be metal. It's just these little black parts that are going to be 0 or close to 0, so it's not going to be metal. Let's see what that looks like so far. It looks pretty good. Next up is the roughness. And let's take this black here. We'll change it to a value of 0.5 gray. And we will move this up to 0.64. Let's take this white here. And, actually, we're not going to do anything to that. That's already where we want it. And this bottom color ramp, let's change this to, the black is going to be to 0.21 gray. We'll move that up to 0.64 as well. And then what I want to do is change the strength here to 0.5. It's a little too strong otherwise. One last thing I forgot to mention too is this sphere in the background. I'm going to change the orientation of this because that's how I had it in my original render. The rotation here under X, let's just change this to 270. You don't really need to do that, but it's just how you get the same result as me. So there we go. We've set up our base chromium color, and if you're not happy with it, adjust this color ramp. That's going to make one of the biggest differences in your end material there. But I'm happy with it, so I'm going to grab both of these and hit Shift-D to duplicate it and then constrain it to the X-axis. I'll just move it over there. I held down Control as well to snap it to this grid here, and then I left-clicked when I was happy with the placement. Let's grab this as well. I'm going to go into Edge Select mode and just grab this edge here, move it along the X-axis a little bit further so I have a bit more room. Now I'm going to create two new materials. This sphere, let's go ahead, click on this, then click on New Material up here. That's going to create a new material, but create, or basically keep what you already set up, so you don't have to reset that up. Let's call this Disp, or we'll call it Chromium Disp 1. Let's grab this one now, and again, we'll hit this right here. We'll call this Chromium Disp 2. While this sphere is highlighted, let's go to the modifier panel. I want to apply these modifiers, so hover over these guys and hit Control-A. You'll apply both of those. I'm going to put another modifier on here, another subdivision surface, and I found I had good results with the levels viewport set at 2 and the render settings at 4. The last thing we need to do to set up displacement is go down to the material properties and just scroll down for this material. We're going to need to change something under the settings where it says displacement. It says bump only as a default. We're going to need to change it to displacement only or displacement and bump. Let's do displacement and bump. Okay, now we're ready to do our displacement. I'm just going to search for a texture coordinate node. And as I mentioned before, I can no longer type in text because it just doesn't work. So I'm going to go COOR. That brings it up quite quickly. And let's go ahead and Shift, Control, left click so we get the object preview there. And I'm going to bring in a Voronoi node. That's going to be the basis of my displacement here. We'll just run this out of distance. Oops, there we go. And then we'll run it into a color ramp. And then we'll run it into a displacement node. And we'll make sure that's plugged into the height, because when you pop it on there, it just plugs into the normal as a default. Let's move this down here. This is actually going to go into the displacement as well. Let's run this principled BSDF so we can see what's going on a little bit better as well. For the scale, we're going to set it at 1. And for the displacement here, let's set the mid-level at 0.7, and we'll just leave the scale at 1 for now. Then I'm going to come to the color ramp and change this black slider. We're going to leave it where it is, but we're going to change the value to 0.21, so we'll lighten it up a little bit. One of the problems I'm encountering here is some of these kind of divots where the Voronoi pattern has that seed in the middle of its cell boundary there. It just goes almost all the way to the center. It creates this unnatural looking kind of distortion where it, it's like it's being sucked into the center. So I found the easiest way to correct this was with a simple RGB curves node, because you can just change the interpolation there. So let's put that right after the color ramp. And all I'm going to do is bring this up to here and add one more point. Just bring it down to about here. The next thing I'm going to do is bring a noise in and just put it right before this Voronoi here. We can see it's gone a little crazy. There's just all these spikes everywhere. And, oh, that's because I brought in a white noise texture. Okay, let's bring in a noise texture. I'm just so used to typing in noise and hitting enter. And now that that's changed, I'm going to need to adjust. But with a noise, it's still a little crazy. Not as crazy, but we basically just need to have less influence coming from this noise texture. So I'm going to bring in a mix RGB. Just place that right here. And run object into color 2. I've got this coming out of the color, by the way, instead of the factor. It's not too much of a difference. It's going to be the same general idea, but you're going to get the same result if you use color there. Let's set the scale to 10 and the detail to 10 as well. Then I'm going to come to the mix RGB and put this at 0.9. So there's very little influence coming from this noise texture. Then I'm going to create another noise texture. Let's just Shift D this one here so we can just create a new one. Just leave it attached there. And this one here, I'm going to set the scale to 2 and the detail is going to be 7. And this one we're going to come out of the color as well. We can see what it's looking like. It's a larger pattern because it's lower frequency there. And let's feed it into a color ramp. Place that right here. The black is going to remain black, but we'll move it up to 0.44, and the white, we'll move it down to 0.55. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to create an exclusion map where this noise here doesn't appear everywhere on my model. So I want it to only appear on certain areas like where it's white or where it's black. So I'm going to move this over actually here, and we're going to put a mix RGB right here, and I'm going to feed this into the top here and then make this bottom color white. So if we see what's happening here, let's go ahead, click back on this guy here. Basically there's some areas now where there is no noise or very little noise, and then here there's quite a bit of noise. If we wanted a little bit of noise on these areas, oops, didn't mean to move that, we could click on this white area here and change this to maybe like 0.9, and then you can see a little bit of noise showing up here. In fact, I might do that. Let's do 0.95 because that looks a little cooler. I don't think there's going to be anywhere where there's perfectly smooth anyways. The last thing I want to do is make it so it's rough in a couple of areas where these black areas are here. So I'm going to create another color ramp. Oops, there we go. And just place it here while I've got the viewer on there. And I'm going to move it up here. Let's move this all down a little bit so we have a bit more room to work, and move all this over here so it's a little easier to look at. And this is going to basically add on to the other roughness map. So I'm going to adjust these values. We're going to set this black at a 0.6 gray. Actually, yeah, 0.6 gray. And we'll change this white to black. Then going to bring in a mix RGB. Place it right here. Run this color ramp into the bottom socket, and this roughness color ramp is going to go into that top socket. And I'm going to plug all of this into the roughness there. We can look at this here. I'm going to adjust this so it's more favoring this bottom color ramp at 0.98. So we're almost done. I'm going to bring in a layer weight node, place it right here, come out of facing, and run this into a color ramp. I'm going to adjust this color ramp just slightly, leave the black where it is, and I'm going to bring this white down to 0.33. Then I'm going to bring in a hue saturation value node. Just type hue, and we'll plug it in here. And I'm just going to duplicate this with Control-Shift-D so it remains attached. And then hold down Control, Shift, and right-click and drag from one of these to the other. And it's going to create a mix node. I'm going to plug this into the top there. If you look at this, basically I'm going to lower the value on this top one to 0.4. And now we just have neat dynamic shading going on with this layer weight node, basically a Fresnel effect. Let's look at this final product here now, and this is our Chromium Displaced one. Let's look at some ways we could vary this a little bit. We could change the scale up here, for instance, to something like 5. We could also change this color ramp here, or this Voronoi here, this mix here. Maybe if we put this at 0.8, we're going to get more of this noise distortion here. So it looks kind of cool. It does kind of create these weird little, distortion bits here that may or may not be what you like, but it does look really cool like this here. You could also change these values to 4D, and then you have this W that you can kind of flip through different ideas here. So this is kind of similar because this is going to change it a bit more. So let's change it to 4D here as well. Then if we flip through these values here, let's say like a couple more, it's quite different, the result here. Okay, so let's check out this last displacement here, Chromium Disp 2, and we're going to have to do a bit of setup. Let's add a subdivision surface modifier. First, let's apply this bevel with Control A, and let's bring in a subdivision surface. I'll just set it at the same thing, 2 and 4, and then let's scroll down to the material settings, and we're going to need to do the same thing under Settings. Select Displacement and Bump under Displacement, and we're ready to go with the displacement. Let's set up the displacement for this last one here. I'm going to search for the texture coordinate node and just bring it in here. And let's come out of Object. And I'm going to show you something that I learned from, I think it was from watching Royal Skies originally, but I've seen a couple of other people do it as well. And that's using two Voronoi nodes. And I'll just set these both up just like this here. And let's just make an incision right here as well. So this top one is going to be F2 Minkowski, and this bottom one is going to be F1 Minkowski. And basically we need to change, if we change the scale up here, we need to change the scale down here, and same goes with the randomness. We're also going to change these both to 4D, so we can get some different seed values. Then lastly, what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract one from the other using a math node. So I'm going to place this here, and make sure we're coming out of distance rather than color. And click on here and hit S. It'll change it to subtract. Let's plug it into the bottom there. So this is the basis for our scratches right here. Let's take the W value and let's change it to 0.5 on both of these. And then we'll change the scale to 7. This is going to be a smaller scratch pattern. Then what I'm going to do is actually grab all three of these and duplicate that twice, because we're going to do 3 different versions here. So I'm going to go like this, just make a bit more room. And these second two Voronoi nodes, let's change the top value to 0.4, like the W value. And let's look at it while we're changing the stuff as well. Then the scale is going to be quite a bit smaller at 0.8. So it's going to be a much larger pattern, lower frequency. Then these bottom two, let's change the W to 1.4, not 104. 1.4, and then the scale will change to 0.8. It's going to be another larger one. You know what, that's supposed to be 0.5. There we go. So then I'm just going to multiply these together. Let's duplicate the subtract. Click here and hit M. Change it to a multiply. We can just plug these in real quick. The way I did that, by the way, is holding down Alt, just dragging with a right click to there. So let's do that one more time. Let's grab this multiply and plug it in there. Move this down. Just plug this into the bottom there. So we can see this crazy pattern emerging. It doesn't look very good yet. Let's add any color ramp just to clean it up a little bit anyways. And all we'll do is we'll just bring the white value way down to 0.01. So we can see basically we got these big long scratches and then these little tiny ones all in there. I'm going to distort everything along this line up here with a noise. Keep on bringing in that white noise. So bring in a noise, place it here, and bring in a mix RGB, place it here. We'll just run object into color 2. And we'll leave everything on the noise as is. We'll change this mix to 0.98. So we can see very small influence on this here. We could change the scale if we wanted to like 20. We can see a little more like cracks maybe. But I find the scratches, when I was looking at sample pictures, were mostly straight. So then what I wanted to do is make it so that they were all kind of appearing in one area. So I just wanted kind of a line of scratches. So to do that, I'm just going to come out of generated and bring in a separate XYZ node. Let's just place that here and move it down here. And we're going to come out of the X, and I'm going to bring in a color ramp. Just place it right here. And we'll move this black up to 0.26. We'll move this white down to 0.37. And if I click on this black and add a new one, oh, that actually didn't do what I thought it would. But this one here, we'll just bring it to black. We'll change this to 0.59. So now we can see this little strip here. We can kind of control where these scratches will appear with this map here. To do that, I'm going to bring in a mix RGB and just place it right here. And this is actually going to go into the top here. And this is going to go into the bottom. And this remaining value, we'll just change this to white. So we can basically see these scratches are just appearing in one area. I'm also going to do one more thing with a noise texture. In fact, why don't I just grab this one here, hit Control-Shift-D. That's going to be coming out of Object as well. Let's zoom in here. Let's change this to 4D. We'll change the W to 0.1, and that's about it. Let's come out of the top one here, the factor. Again, it doesn't really matter. It's going to be the same general pattern, but this is how you get exactly the same as what I've got here. I'm going to change the black to 0.4, like the flag position there, not the actual gray value. And the white is going to come down to 0.5. Then I'm going to mix this with this one right here, just with a math node set to multiply. Plug that in there, and let's see what we've got. So we've got the exclusion from this here mixed with this right here, forming this, and that's basically making it so the scratches only appear in certain areas. The last thing I wanted to do was just make it so that basically these scratches are oriented differently. So I'm going to make some reroutes there, and I did that by holding down Shift and right-clicking and dragging through the existing node line. And I'm going to put something right here. I'm going to put two nodes, a vector rotate, and then a mapping node. This might be overkill. This is just a simple way to do it anyway. So let's look at this first setup here. And what we're going to do is we're going to change this angle to 64. And then we're going to change this X value right here to 4. So basically, it's stretched it along. If I set this to 0, you can see it's just stretching it along the y-axis there. But as I rotate this right here, it rotates. I can't do that right here. If I try and do it right here, you can see it rotates the pattern and stretches it at the same time. So that's why I did it with two different nodes. So 64. Let's do the same thing for these other setups as well. I'm just going to move this over a little bit. Give us a bit more room. We're going to put a vector rotate right here and a mapping node right here. And same thing right down here. This mapping node will leave the same on all of them, but this angle we're going to change. Let's look at this second setup here. We'll change this one to 70. And this one will change to 60. And so what that does when we add them all together is they're all in the same general orientation. It's just basically offset slightly. So it looks more like scratches this way, I thought. We're pretty much done. Let's try plugging this into displacement and just see what happens. So if you plug this into the height right here, we can plug this into the displacement right here. And let's make sure this is set to white. It is good. And the mid-level is going to be 0.5. Scale is going to be 0.7. But something weird is happening. It's basically blowing it all up there. We just need to lessen the effect of this displacement. The scratches are kind of doing their thing there. Let's go ahead and bring in a math node. Place it right after this mix. Set this to multiply. We're going to set this to a very small value, something like 0.005. Something weird is happening. This wasn't happening before, but I was able to fix it just by changing the mid-level to 0. And now it looks much more normal. We got our interesting scratches there as well, which are kind of cool. They're a little tough to see in the preview, but if you render it out, you'll be able to see it better. For adjusting this last texture I created here, I do recommend creating some value nodes for these W and scale values, just to keep them synced up if you do want to adjust them. It'll just be way faster. You won't have to worry about setting all the values the same. It's going to be 7 here. Plug that into the scale. So I'll just do this really quick here. This is going to be 0.4. So I'll plug that in here and here. Duplicate that and set it to 0.8. I'll plug that into the scales. Let's duplicate that and set it to 1.4. Plug it into the W's. and duplicate that. We'll plug that into the scale, set it at 0.5. There we go. I'm actually going to do one more thing too. I almost forgot. It's just the same layer weight thing I did last time for the displacement 1. So let's come out of facing, and I'm going to bring in a color ramp, place it here. I found I had pretty good results by bringing the white down to about 0.22 or so. I'm going to bring in a hue saturation value node, place it here, and shift Control D. So you duplicate it while it's still attached to that color ramp. And I'm going to hold down Control Shift and right click and drag just between these two nodes. It creates a mix RGB really quickly. And I can plug this right into the factor here. I'm going to lower the value on the top one to 0.2. So basically, it's just going to make it pop a little bit more. It's not really super necessary to do. It just adds a little extra something. Okay, so that's everything for today. Hope you're able to follow along and see what I was doing and how you would change it around. If you are confused, just let me know. You can ask me in the comments section here, or you can hit me up on my Discord as well. A bunch of friendly people there. So anyways, thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you in the next one.